Why don't you stand up and fight this guy hard like you done before? That was beautiful. But don't lay down in front of him like this. Like some kind of mongrel or something. Because he's gonna kick your face in pieces. You know that? That's right. This guy just don't want to win, you know. He wants to bury you, he wants to humiliate you. He wants to prove to the whole world that it was nothing but some kind of a freak the first time out. Yet he said you are one-time lucky bum. Well, now, I don't want to get mad in a biblical place like this. But I think you're a hell of a lot more than that, kid. A hell of a lot.
We are back for another episode of Tabletop Tune Up. My name is Ben Dyer. I'm here with my co-host Mark Lehman. It is good to see you again, sir.
How you doing?
Good, man. How are you doing?
None too shabby. Doing well. Excited for the fall.
Yeah, it's weather's changing, leaves are changing. The pumpkin spice must flow. And but you know, Mark, I guess not all is well. You got something you need to get off your chest today?
Yeah, we're going to be talking today about getting up when you get knocked down.
That's important. It's a key skill.
It's a key skill, and I'm going to start by telling you about a time, Ben, when I got knocked down.
I'm trying not to do the lyrics, but you got back up again?
They ain't ever going to keep me down, buddy.
All right, good deal. Well, what happened?
Yeah, so years ago, I met a group of, when I first moved out to Minnesota, I met a group of like-minded nerds at the office. We decided to get together, play some D&D. I was pretty excited. Hadn't played in a little while since I moved out here. And I like these folks. Tish, Christopher, Josh, I'm going to give you some love your way. But I put a lot of effort into this game. I wanted to develop their individual backstories. You might remember when Randy was talking about, in our interview with him, I wanted to give them like a similar experience. So I planned out some pretty elaborate stuff for each player. It was going to be massive. I did not start small.
We learned this stuff along the way, man.
Yeah. We played for a few months, and slowly pieces of each character's backstory started to surface. My friend Tom, who I knew the least, but I did admire, he had this wizard that he created. He had a great backstory that he kind of concocted and threw my way. He had once been, his character had once been a very powerful wizard who lost his magic and had to start all over. And he had these gaps in his memory, and he was trying to uncover the mystery behind them. So that's what he brought to me.
Interesting. Yeah, that gives you a lot of places to go. I've seen that done well and poorly, but it sounds like this was a good start.
Well, this was done poorly.
Oh, no.
I came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea. Spoiler, Ben, it was not.
Oh, no.
I thought, what if Tom's character had been a victim of a changeling? In this simplified scenario, I'm going to simplify it because we're not going to go into the details, but this changeling tried to take, his memories and his powers, but this changeling became overwhelmed by Tom's character, high-level wizards, his power, his strength, and the mental battle that ensued damaged the changeling mind, basically killing the changeling, but leaving Tom's character, his wizard, trapped unknowingly in the body of this changeling.
Oh, wow. It's like some kind of a psychic duel.
Yeah. So this might explain in my mind, why his magic is weakened. He would need to rebuild all of his stamina, his constitution, all that stuff to kind of regain the full use of his power. But the idea was that he was at some point he would find out and he'd have access to some of these changeling abilities as well.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
he would be in a kind of like a race to find his original form, his original body.
I like it. That feels like it could work.
Yeah, Tom did not like it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, when Tom found out, man, he was furious, like shaking with rage.
Really?
Furious. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He told me that I had completely stripped him of his agency, which, yeah, I kind of did.
Okay.
He said he had no desire to play this character because it wasn't his character anymore. And I honestly couldn't blame him too much. I mean, but then Tom rocks me. He absolutely rocks me. He said I was the worst GM he had ever played with.
Wow.
Yeah. Ouch.
That's hard to hear.
It was a kick in the nuts, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Because, like, Ben, we all define ourselves a little bit by what matters most in our life. If you're like, let's say you're a doctor, you'd say I'm a doctor, or like if I'm a husband, or you're a Vikings fan. For me, I would say I'm a GM.
Certainly, the more time we invest in stuff, the more we care about it, the more we identify with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, when he said that, man, that hurt at my core. Like, but you know what? Tom was hurting too.
That's true.
So, and I was the reason for that. So I apologize, but apologies couldn't fix the situation. Our campaign ended that night.
Like, wow.
Just ended.
That's dramatic.
Yeah. It was embarrassing. I was with the other players. I didn't touch my dice for over a year.
Really?
Yeah.
It got you out of the game for a year.
Yeah. His parting shot defined me at that moment. And we're going to pause the story here because today we're talking about getting back on that horse.
Boy, what a tee up.
Yeah. We're talking about picking yourself up when things go sideways. I've been there. I'm sure you've been there.
Oh, I have.
If you play games long enough, you're going to have failures. And that's okay. Let's talk about how to get back up on that horse.
This is a great topic for us today. And yeah, just to make sure you don't feel like you're alone in that boat, I have tanked many campaigns.
Oh, yeah.
I've had games that I've played in as a player and that I zigged when I should have zagged, and that basically led us into all kinds of trouble. But even as a GM, I mean, I think those are the ones that you feel the most because, of course, you're responsible for how that whole thing goes out. And, kind of like you're saying, like if players aren't coming along with it, or if you decide to get experimental in ways that maybe you're not really experienced in, things can go in weird directions and you got to do something to recover. So today, friends, we're going to talk about what to do and how to recover and how to understand what went wrong and so on. And so let's actually just start by kind of getting on the board a little bit of an idea about what kind of ways your campaign can get knocked down before we then get into like what to do to fix it.
Let's identify the types of knockdowns.
First of all, you could have story problems. And this could be things like you just don't have your story put together. Players don't know where to go next. They get frustrated with the pacing of the story and how quickly things are happening. There can be all kinds of different ways that the in-game issues that you are teeing up for your players might go astray.
We also could have things such as social problems, Ben. I mean, this is a social game.
It is.
Not everybody's going to get along, and there could be personality conflicts, maybe playstyle conflicts. So social problems could end a game, a good game.
That's right. Well, and also remember back when we talked about engaging your players, we talked about how different players show up to the game for different things. I've had players that were very kind of technically oriented. They really were into the mechanics and the transactional bits and the rules and the game aspects. I've had other players who were very narrative focused. They really wanted to get in and act the part out, have a great time telling that story. And if you get both of those players in the same group, if they're not deferring to each other, if they don't expect that they're going to be sometimes doing the one and sometimes doing the other, it can be kind of tough.
Hey, Ben, have you ever encountered a problem where players just didn't like the system you were playing, you were running?
Yeah, I've wisened up at this point. And before I actually try out a new system with people, I kind of give them a little bit of a, here's how it works. Here's what it's about. Yeah. I was surprised to hear one friend of mine was just like, I don't like dice pools, like period. And I was like, this is a dice pool game. And it was a great game, but he was just like, he just did not like that kind of mechanic.
It's a lot
And
of
I'm
math.
like, I'm like, whatever, man. It's a mechanic. It's not like, okay, whatever. But the point was, I figured that out before we got halfway into a game. And then we had everybody at the table and then he's disengaged or worse, decides to just get up and walk out or do something horrible.
Well, I can't say I dislike dice pulls, but I got to tell you, I just love me a D20.
I think there's a lot of people out there that share that view.
Speaking of dice, man, dice can end a game too.
They can. Dice will turn on you.
Yeah.
And, as a GM, I'm sure you've had this experience where players are kind of like they're down resources. Maybe they made a bad choice. They're spread a little bit thin. And then all of a sudden the 20s start coming out and you're rolling criticals and you can't do a thing about it. You start hitting them hard and you don't want to, but the dice have determined that they're going after player blood that day. What are you going to do then?
Ben, you know me. I like to roll in front of people. I like to roll my dice. I like to see that dice tumble across the table.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, it's going to happen sometimes. Yeah, so unfortunately,
sometimes the dice attack. Let's all say too that like there's a whole aspect of this when you're starting out that could just be you as a GM, and that could be a variety of things connected to any of the above, right? It could be as a GM. You may have to make rulings in the moment and maybe you realize you didn't make the right ruling later, or maybe your players disagree, or maybe, you're really at sea with the book. Maybe it's a more complex system than you like.
Is calling it bad GMing a little too harsh?
Well, I guess the thing is you could say there's lots of reasons for that, right? It could be inexperience or it could be bad social skills. I mean, there could be lots of ways that could go sideways.
There's been times I've been a bad GM, so like I get it. It's okay.
Yeah, I think that's an important note too.
A big part of it is maybe you just have poor system knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the times I felt like I was probably the worst GM was when I had poor table management. I wasn't keeping track of time. I wasn't keeping track of pacing, which was causing players to get a little bored here and there. So, I mean, these are all things you learn and you have to learn by doing. So don't be afraid of that.
That's exactly right. And the whole point of this episode is that stuff, it's not like it could happen, friends. That will happen. If you're starting out, or heck, even now, I mean, we all still struggle with this from time to time. So we're going to talk today about how to get back on the horse. And frankly, there could be a lot of variations on these or even combinations of these, right? It could turn out that, you're at sea in a new system and it turns out it's the wrong system for your players.
So now we've kind of got some idea, we got to start assessing when you've had a game that failed. We got to assess what really went wrong. You're doing an autopsy on the crime scene that is the failed game.
Yeah. I mean, after a game session goes sideways, one of the best things you can do, or even if it's kind of going sideways and you're in the middle of it and you're like, this is going really sideways. Players could be fighting or this could be really awful or whatever. And you realize I'm just not prepared for this today, whatever it might be. Don't be afraid to actually call it for the day and go, you know what, you guys, I need to actually kind of reground here. I need to get more into this book, or I need to settle some stuff, or we just need to kind of have a little cooling off period, whatever it may be. And then take some time to do your own little assessment about what happened. So Mark, what kinds of things should people look for?
Yeah. Just talking about the topics above about getting knocked down, we were talking about some of those. We need to assess how that happened. The group dynamic, for instance, the social issues, the group dynamic. Do we need to let a player go? Or do we need to talk to a player about their behavior? Is the game system right? These are all things you need to kind of like go back and have discussions about. Obviously, when dice attack, that's not necessarily anybody's fault per se, but maybe could be some things you could incorporate into your game that might help the players or give them an edge.
Well, and also, like, if dice are attacking, it might just be that you need to stop for a minute and get some time to yourself to figure out what in the world you're going to do. A TPK doesn't necessarily have to mean that everybody dies. You could have your whole party wake up the next day in prison or in the drunk tank, maybe more, maybe lower stake. What's the right word for this? What is it when it's more congenially? That's not right.
I don't know what you're talking.
Like when it doesn't turn out quite as bad as you're in prisoner, stuck in a chain gang on the way to some hard labor or something like
It could
that.
always get worse.
It could get worse. Anyway, so it could turn out that things are going to happen off screen, and the players don't realize that until their characters wake up after they thought they got killed.
Yeah, and one of the things I do when I can see things going south, like with dice, or just maybe they're not prepared for the severity of this next encounter that you just stepped into. Sometimes I might just stop for a moment, either end the session and just tell them, "Look, you guys got to bring your A game next week," and I mean that seriously. Or just pause the game for a moment and say that it's like, I'm going to walk away from the table for 10 minutes. I need you guys to dig into your inventory, dig deep, and come out swinging, because I'm going to take you all out. And I'll walk for 10 seconds, and then they know right then to start looking through those items, maybe those magic items they might have been holding on to for too long.
Yeah, we don't use a lot of sports analogies here on Tabletop Tune Up, but really this feels like the timeout in the fourth quarter of a basketball game when, the other team has like really been successful and you need to kind of break up that mental rhythm. One thing to kind of note too is that when dice attack, smaller groups are more vulnerable. So there's more resources when you've got a larger group, even though it can be sometimes harder to manage. So just keep in mind that when you do have smaller groups, you might need a few more trapdoors and other sneaky tricks to get them restabilized if things go sideways.
Fair point.
Okay, Mark, we've talked about assessing what went wrong, taking that break. What are some strategies? What kinds of things might you come up with when you're figuring out how to get things set right?
Before you even decide, getting back on the horse, do you want to get back on the horse? I mean, that's a serious consideration. Are you burnt out? Do you need time to recover from this?
That's a legitimate concern. Self-care is important. And as a GM, you're doing a lot of extra work for everybody. And taking time for yourself, letting somebody else be a GM for a little while, these are important things to be able to do, just to rotate out and give yourself time to recover.
Yeah, don't quit the hobby. Be a player for a while.
It sounds, Mark, like you had to take a break for like a year, you said.
Yeah, I was a little too sensitive.
Okay.
Well, that goes kind of to our next. My ego was bruised. I was kind of embarrassed. So I need to give myself a bit of a break. Probably not that long, though.
I think it's important to kind of remind yourself this is a game. You're with friends. Mm-hmm. This is something we all get together to do because it's something we like to do. It's something we get to do. This isn't something you have to do. This isn't like the SATs. It's not like some work certification you got to get done in the next 2 months or something, right?
Yeah.
This is something that we do because we want to.
And also, like when you're thinking about that off time, did you try your best? A bad game says nothing about you as a person, Ben. It's just, I took it so personally, but it shouldn't be. Obviously, some people can make it personal, but as Stan Lee says, you can't give in to the haters.
Well, and so once you've taken a minute and kind of done a little bit of a self-assessment to figure out if you need a break or maybe if you've been, I don't know, kind of over-investing or taking it too personally, then maybe what you can do is start looking at your players too. And maybe there's something about the conversations you need to have with them. Start having conversations about what went wrong. What do they think went wrong? And sometimes it's interesting. I mean, this is a sort of a counseling technique. You hear the psychology people will do this. Like, they're not going to sit there and tell you all the stuff.
Yeah.
They're going to ask you to come up with, well, what do you think happened? And what do you think should be done about that?
Yeah. Open up that conversations with your players. If you had maybe some sort of blowout with the player, maybe that's something you need to address. Sometimes as a GM, you're in that leadership position. Sometimes you have to be that bad guy. And, sometimes that's okay.
It is okay. And actually, sometimes it's necessary. And we've played games. You and I have both played games where we had to say, I'm sorry, this isn't a good fit. Mm-hmm. It's fine. And I think that's a good moment to remember that bit about, hey, this is something we get to do. It's not something we have to do. Mm-hmm. I've actually had conversations where I said to people, look, I think this is a great game to play. I want to keep playing with you. I don't think this is the group you and me want to be in. I think you and me need to make a different group, and we need to play with that group that's a little more matching your sensibilities and what you want to get out of these games. And then this other group that we were part of, maybe I'll keep playing with them sometimes or whatever. But the point is like, that's not where you're going to have a lot of fun. And there's graceful ways to have that conversation.
Let's talk real quick also about those games where maybe the system is having issue, or even like dice roll. And we talk about how the dice can attack. That could potentially be a system issue, and we could fix that.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to fix system problems. One way is to, first of all, start with making sure you understand what kind of game or gameplay the group likes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you've heard me talk about like groups that are more technically inclined. They like crunch. They like systems that simulate lots of little mechanics and give them lots of things to do. When we interviewed Randy, for example, Randy is somebody I think who likes a little more crunch in his games because I think he feels like it gives him lots of options and levers and things to try and be creative with. There's other people I think who find that that's not for them. They want something that moves more quickly and that they just have a different sensibility about that. Both are good. Both are fine. The trick is, what are you hearing from your players?
Can I give you a quick example of that?
Sure. Yeah, let's hear it.
Randy and I had been playing this Curious game for a while. Remember Middle-earth role-playing games had these really crunchy crit systems.
Oh, yeah.
Every time we rolled a 20, we would roll in those charts. And it was a lot of fun. But it wasn't fun for the other groups I played in. They didn't like it. They didn't like that death save kind of stuff. So,
friends, if you've looked at a Rollmaster critical table, go treat yourself to just what kind of horrors might await you if you roll an E critical with a magic spell.
We ended up softening that table a little bit by, as characters kind of advanced in levels, they could swing the chart based on their level and stuff. So you kind of like mitigated some of the worst results and encouraged some of the best results on the player side and mitigated some of the worst results from the monster side, you know. So you can tweak your rules just a little bit, cater to your players, make them feel heard.
Yeah. So figure out what kind of system they need. If you need to house rule it, as Mark is talking about, that's a great way to go. Sometimes it might just be a matter of changing systems too. Any of the above is legit. The trick is to fit the right system to your group and figure out what they need, what they want to play in. So another thing you can do is spend time learning more about GMing too, right? You can improve your craft. So first thing to do, listen to Tabletop Tune Up. Shameless plug.
Oh, yeah. Shameless plug. Nice.
The other thing to do is there's usually for any game, one of my favorite ways to actually learn about how to play a game is to go look for live play sessions, people that are essentially leading those discussions about the game, get into forums. There's so much out there right now that there didn't used to be, you know, when all we could find in our pre-internet days was a book and you kind of have to just figure it out.
Yeah, one of my favorite ways, Ben, is to shadow the other GMs. I stalk or lurk.
Yeah.
When I'm a player in their game, I'll take notes of things they're doing that is really good, things I don't like. And then sometimes I might ask them, how'd you pull that off? Like, what was your thought there? That was great. You know, like when they do something really neat after the encounter and everything, ask questions.
And I think then the other thing to do is go get inspired by influences that have nothing to do with the game. Go watch a movie, go spend some time in nature, go read a really fascinating bit of history or listen to some great music or something, right? Find a way to get that non-cognitive thing that's in your heart inspired again. And when you're ready to do that stuff and you've spent some time having those conversations, qualifying your ego a little bit, getting your energy back, changing the system as you need to, then at that point, maybe you'll be ready to reapproach the group and say, hey, let's get started. I've got this great idea. Pitch it to them, listen to what they have to say. We had a whole podcast on how to start a campaign. But Mark, what did you do when you came back from this hiatus? How did you get out of your slump?
Well, Ben, I left my story at rock bottom. I was shaped by Tom's harsh words. You know, about a year had passed. I finally returned to GMing. I stuck with pre-written modules. I was, frankly, just a little afraid to pour myself into any sort of game. But, you know, I wasn't necessarily alone. You know, my wife, Stacy, she's my greatest cheerleader.
Mm-hmm.
She always pushed me forward. And of course, you, Ben, I got to thank you and the strange circumstances of COVID, which allowed us to meet a great group of gamers that inspired me. And through that game, that shared storytelling that we all experienced, I was able to like redefine myself. I wasn't that worst GM anymore. I became a storyteller and I grew from that failure and I learned from my mistakes and I learned from failure.
I think it's a great comeback story. Friends, this is hopefully going to inspire you if things go wrong or if things are starting to go wrong, different things you can do to assess what's going wrong, how to figure out how to take that break and get back on the horse again. Remember, it's something you get to do. It's not something you have to do. And this is a great time. Just be intentional, listen, and you'd be amazed at how much a little bit of adult conversation will fix for you. Now I think it's time for us to get to our tune-up segment for this week, Mark.
What do we got today?
Well, we had someone who sent us this request. They said, I'm looking for ideas on how to run a multi-way conversation between two or more NPCs and the party. Particularly, there's a situation where these NPCs aren't in agreement. They're going to argue, and the party needs to intervene in some way. Or in other cases, there might be an example where the party is speaking to some ruling organization and they've got internal disagreements. This person said, if I'm the DM and I'm voicing all these NPCs, the players are spending a lot of time sitting around while I talk to myself. That's just awkward for me and boring for them. So, Mark, what do you do in a situation like that?
This is a really challenging question here, because you want the players to feel interactive with this. You can't let them just be on the sidelines watching two people talk. Why don't we approach this like one of those trees? If they do this, then this. So, and at each one of those junctions, we want to maybe, if there's a skill check involved, consider a skill check that may be involved. You don't always have to have one, but the players want to interject into a conversation and say something powerful to sway one side or the other. Heck, that might be an opportunity for a dice roll.
I think that's right. That's really interesting. So having essentially not a script as such, but essentially a flow figured out ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
And so then in that
a flow chart.
Yeah, in that flow, then you can choose. And this doesn't have to be super technical, friends. It could be just a kind of a list of bullets, or it could be kind of a flow chart with boxes and diagrams and things like that. But whatever the case, if you've got essentially both sides of this NPC conversation, you can actually just descriptively tell the party what shape the conversation's taking. You come in, there's a furious argument going on. One side says X, the other side says not X.
Yeah.
And in the course of about 15 minutes of listening to this, that you hear the following points are coming out. On the one side, they want to say pro X for these reasons. You could essentially do that kind of descriptive bit and let some time pass.
That's a great idea, Ben. And I think one thing you could add into that is don't leave the dice out of even that. Maybe make an insight check. Maybe the guy's being performative. You realize he's not as angry as he appears. Maybe a perception check reveals one of them's got his hand behind his back with a dagger.
Yeah, no, I love it. And so the thought here, right, is if you've got both sides of this conversation that you're having happen with these NPCs, that doesn't mean the players aren't engaged, that they're not doing something. Think about what's happening around the side. Think about what's happening in the margins. Think about the skill rolls that might be relevant. And then, of course, it's going to be the case, I expect, that the players are going to want to intervene at some point. Think about where the natural place for that is. Think about what kinds of things the players are going to need to do to gain credibility in what is now a three-way conversation.
Players might not even want to be involved with that conversation, you'll find. There might be somebody who says, I want to use this as an opportunity to pick pockets.
Right.
Or I want to cut that person's mic with a hacking skill check. There could be all sorts of things they want to do. So just make sure you're checking in with their players, asking them, what would you like to do?
Well, I think these are a lot of great ideas for how to manage a NPC to NPC conversation. Players get involved, or maybe players don't. Make sure you just give them things to do that maybe don't require them to be in the conversation, but that let them track and stay engaged. There's a lot of skills and a lot of games that help you with that. Friends, I think that's it for our episode this week. Mark, any other thoughts?
No, I think I'm good. Ben, always appreciate you. We'll meet up here next week for another episode.
Looking forward to it, friends. And until then, keep those dice rolling.